The first light of dawn barely brushed the skyline of East Hollow, a neighborhood most city residents tried hard to forget. Once a lively borough filled with small businesses and young families, it had slowly been swallowed by neglect. Graffiti-covered walls, broken sidewalks, and rusted fences now defined the place. In a narrow, two-story home wedged between boarded-up buildings, Naomi Jenkins was already awake. The shriek of her alarm sliced through the quiet, pulling her from a dreamless sleep. She blinked up at the ceiling, where faded wallpaper peeled like dried petals. Her room, cramped and cold, held nothing of luxury, just stacks of textbooks, a flickering lamp, and a mattress that had seen better decades. With careful movement, she stretched and sat up, mindful not to knock over the precariously balanced pile of academic folders at her feet. The house was still. Her mother had likely left for her shift at the nursing home, and her little brother Elijah would be tucked under a threadbare blanket in the next room. Naomi padded across the worn linoleum, grabbing a hoodie before stepping into the tiny kitchen. There wasn't much in the cabinets, just a few slices of dry bread and the last scrape of peanut butter, but it was enough to keep her going. She ate quickly, not because she was hungry, but because she had no time to waste. Today was different. Today was the day she had dreamed of. She opened the closet and pulled out her outfit, a plain white blouse and a navy skirt she'd found at a thrift store. She'd ironed them the night before, taking care to remove every wrinkle. In the cracked mirror above the sink, she adjusted her collar, studying her reflection. Her deep brown skin, her determined eyes, and her natural curls pulled tightly into a bun gave her a quiet kind of strength. She packed her resume into a plastic folder, every line of it earned through late-night study sessions and part-time jobs. She kissed her brother's forehead, whispered a prayer, and stepped out into the drizzling gray morning. The walk to the bus stop was long. The sky hung low with heavy clouds, the smell of damp concrete mixing with the faint trace of diesel. Naomi pulled her hood tight around her face and hurried. The bus was scheduled to arrive at 6:15 a.m. She needed to be across the city by 8:30 sharp. Whitestone and Barrett wasn't just a firm, it was the firm. Landing an interview, there was like scoring a golden ticket out of a life she'd always known. But at 6:17, the bus still hadn't arrived. At 6:20, murmurs broke out among the other commuters. At 6:23, phones buzzed. A transit strike had begun, effective immediately. No buses. No warning. Naomi stared at the screen, her chest tightening. People around her cursed and dispersed. Some called rides. Others simply gave up. But Naomi couldn't. She clutched her folder tighter and started to walk. The firm was miles away, and the rain was intensifying, but she had no choice. Her shoes soaked through within minutes. Cold water seeped into her socks. Wind lashed at her face, but she pressed on. Through industrial lots and empty alleyways, she marched, the resume folder tucked under her sweatshirt. She didn't stop. Not when the rain turned into a sheet. Not when her skin went numb. She was halfway there when she came across a scene that stopped her cold. An elderly woman, hunched in a wheelchair, was stranded at the edge of the sidewalk. Her grocery bags were pulling the chair backward into a flooded gutter, her frail arms barely able to push forward. Naomi's brain screamed to keep moving. She was soaked. She was late, but her heart stopped her feet. The woman's shoe slipped. The chair lurched. Naomi sprinted forward without thinking, shoved the resume deeper into her backpack, and grabbed the handles. Mud splashed up her legs. Rain soaked her to the bone. But inch by inch, she pushed the woman up and onto the sidewalk. "Thank you, baby." The woman wheezed, breathless and shaking. Naomi didn't wait for more. She carried the groceries into the woman's building, helped her settle inside, and then turned to go. Only then did she look at herself, skirt covered in grime, blouse clinging to her skin, hair a dripping mess. The professional image she'd prepared was ruined. But the interview was in less than an hour. And if she ran, she might still make it. So she did. Through elite neighborhoods with manicured hedges and perfect sidewalks. Through intersections where luxury cars honked and sped by. People stared. Some recoiled. Others whispered. But she didn't stop. When she finally reached the glimmering glass doors of Whitestone and Barrett, Naomi was a storm-battered shadow of the woman who had stepped out of East Hollow hours before. She pulled the door open, and silence fell over the lobby. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. A receptionist blinked in shock as Naomi stepped across the polished floor, her shoes squelching with every step. Naomi approached the desk and held out her resume, her hands shaking. I have an interview. 8:30. Research department. The receptionist hesitated but checked the list. Take the elevator to the 22nd floor. Someone will meet you there. Naomi nodded, then stepped into the elevator, her heart thudding in her chest. Her clothes were cold and clung to her skin. She looked down and saw the smears of dirt across her sleeves, the soaked hem of her skirt. She didn't belong here. And yet, here she was. On the 22nd floor, a young assistant with a clipboard approached. Her professional mask slipped momentarily as she took in Naomi's appearance, but she quickly recovered. Right this way, she said, leading Naomi into a conference room. Inside were 5 other candidates, each impeccably dressed, seated confidently around a polished table. They glanced up as Naomi entered. Some smirked. One whispered behind a perfectly manicured hand. Naomi took a seat at the far end, clutching her resume. Moments later, the interview panel arrived. The CEO, Mr. Harrison Whitestone himself, stood at the center, a tall man with silver hair and a gaze sharp enough to cut glass. As he scanned the room, his eyes landed on Naomi. They paused. One by one, candidates introduced themselves. They spoke of Ivy League schools, summer internships in Europe, awards and accolades. Naomi listened quietly, her heart pounding in her chest. When it was her turn, she stood slowly. She didn't spin a tale. She didn't lie. She told the truth. About growing up in East Hollow. About working night shifts and still graduating top of her class. About helping a woman in a wheelchair on the way there, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. When she finished, silence filled the room. Not mockery, not pity, just silence. Mr. Whitestone leaned back in his chair, his eyes unreadable. The rest of the interview continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Naomi could feel it. The other candidates seemed suddenly too polished, their words too rehearsed. She remained seated, quiet but composed, her hands folded on her lap. When the session ended, the panel stood. Thank you all, Mr. Whitestone said. We'll be in touch. Candidates gathered their things and filed out, some glancing back at Naomi with confusion. As she turned to leave, Mr. Whitestone called out, Ms. Jenkins, stay a moment. She froze, turned. He waited for the others to leave before he spoke again. Why did you come? He asked. She swallowed. Because I promised myself, and I don't break promises. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Follow me. He led her through a side door, into a smaller office with plush chairs and warm light. She sat, hands trembling in her lap. I started this company with nothing, he said. People laughed at me too. I showed up to my first job covered in grease from a night shift at a garage. Someone gave me a chance. I've never forgotten that. He looked at her. I want to offer you a position here. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Her vision blurred. It won't be easy, he continued. You'll have to work harder than everyone else. But I think you already know how to do that. She nodded. Yes, sir. I do. He smiled, warm and genuine. Welcome to Whitestone and Barrett. She shook his hand, her fingers still cold, her heart on fire. The days that followed were hard. Her new coworkers whispered. Some sneered. But Naomi kept her head down and did the work. She showed up early, stayed late, and let her actions speak. Weeks later, she led a project presentation that stunned the entire executive board. Months later, she was mentoring new interns. And a year later, she stood at the same marble lobby where it had all begun, clean, confident, and no longer invisible. She had walked through storms. She had stood alone. And she had risen. Not because the world had made room for her, but because she had refused to let it ignore her. And she never would.